Hey Sopranos fans, welcome to another episode here on Bully Whispers, and we are here today to evaluate Law 13 of Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power. When asking for help, appeal to people's self-interest, never to their mercy or gratitude, in the TV show The Sopranos. While this may seem like a fairly obvious concept to follow, especially considering how little mercy or gratitude any of the characters have, very few of them actually do. Now, in order for me to lay out how this analysis will break down, we must first take a second to look at one of the historical examples given in this chapter. In 433 BC, the island of Corfu and the city of Corinth stood on the brink of conflict, and both sent ambassadors to Athens to try and win them over to their respective sides. The representative of Corfu speaks first and kicks the whole thing off by acknowledging that they have never helped Athens before, had no ties of friendship, and had even allied Athens' enemies in the past. All they had to offer was an alliance of mutual interest. Corfu and Athens had the two biggest navies in the area, and the two of them together could even rival Sparta. Then, the Athenians listened to the Corinthian representative give a passionate speech, not only about their current situation, but also about how they were longtime allies and how Corinth had helped them so much in the past, and the Athenians voted overwhelmingly to support Corfu. You see, while history may remember the Athenians nobly for their philosophy, etc., it's important to keep in mind that they were also the preeminent pragmatists of classical Greece. And, as Greene points out, pragmatic people will always opt to discuss the future over the past.
That's because remember when is the lowest form of conversation.
So in this episode, we will evaluate Law 13 in The Sopranos by starting with one of the main problems with the Corinthians approach, as shown through Junior, before moving on to Vito, through whom the benefits and consequences of the law can be seen, both in how he dealt with others and how his situation was handled once he was outed. Then we will be moving on to the one thing you should never do, as shown through David Scatino, and ending with an example of the reversal of the law as shown through Tony and Finn. The most obvious problem with the Corinthians' approach, especially when compared to Corfu's, is that they didn't really bring anything to the table in terms of how they could help the Athenians, much like Junior when approaching Tony about his financial troubles.
We have to change our arrangement.
Now granted, there wasn't much Junior could bring to the table at that point due to his situation. Yet, despite the fact that Tony clearly doesn't care, he continues on his tirade about his problems in an effort to get help, and not surprisingly,
Our split stays the same.
Greene warns that most people are so caught up in themselves that they confuse their needs with the other person's, who usually has many of their own.
I got cash flow problems of my own.
I one time hit 50, 75 grand to cover the audibility expert.
I got two kids in private schools.
God damn it!
And as a result, they usually come off either desperate, which Junior does, or at best a waste of time. Now, while Tony did end up changing the arrangement in what seemed to be a very sentimental move, it's important to note here that this was also the same meeting that Junior gave up Richie's plot, proving himself to still be a potential source of information for Tony. Unlike Junior, Vito does show a penchant for appealing to other people's self-interest. However, he's fairly inconsistent in doing so, and this is best seen in his attempts to gather support for him becoming boss. He starts off strong in approaching Eugene after he had just been told he can't retire.
It's not so silly when you think about it. I'm a top earner now. It's not out of the realm of possibility that I could be the boss of this family one day.
Right off the bat, he subtly implies that retirement might be a possibility if he were to become boss. Unfortunately for Vito, that relationship never panned out, but that didn't stop him from continuing to try and rally support. However, in his next attempt with Larry Boris, he seems to have completely forgotten that principle.
Somebody's gonna have to step into the breach. I'm a young man. And now, without the weight, I'm a healthy man. With longevity.
He clearly didn't offer Larry Boy any real reason to side with him, so what was his sales pitch here? I'm not that old yet, and I'm not as fat as some of the guys we hang out with, so you should consider me for next boss of the family. These points aren't likely to be very convincing to someone who sees no benefit for themselves, especially when they aren't that much older and quite a bit thinner. That being said, even if they had been convincing, it wouldn't have mattered, because shortly thereafter Vito was outed, and both aspects of the Law 13 can be seen in the Sopranos crew's response to this news. Like Greene expressed, most people were so locked up in their own feelings about the situation that their responses were emotional rather than rational.
I can't believe I stuck up for him. I feel like I've been stabbed in the heart.
while pragmatic people, who are often more successful in their quest for power, tend to look more towards the future and any benefits they may obtain.
It's hard to believe I couldn't get something more out of him if he would have come back. Stocks, offshore shit. I don't know.
However, Syl, the most pragmatic of the bunch, brought up what was probably the most convincing argument to Tony by pointing out the true long-term impact of his decision.
But you cut Vito slack now that he's out of the closet? Just the excuse people need to go off the reservation. Start withholding serious money.
But the real reason behind Tony's supposed indecision wasn't financial. It was because Tony is the kind of person who is moved by desire rather than obligation, and everyone coming at him like he had to do it just brought out his stubborn side. In fact, Greene notes not only that people are more moved by desire, but also that many find obligation to be a burden, which is why the worst thing you can do is bring up the past, and this is where we get to David Scatino. As previously covered, the Corinthian approach was ineffective largely due to the fact that they didn't offer any benefits to the Athenians, but there was also another aspect of which the Corinthians were unaware. By bringing up the past, they were just angering the Athenians. To power-hungry people like the Athenian Assembly, or Tony Soprano, bringing up the past is like bringing up a debt that has no real obligation attached to it, but trying to make it seem like it does. We see Scatino try this move with Tony when he's in trouble, and just like with the Athenians, it was not only ineffective, but actually made the situation worse by annoying them.
Hey, you remember when those Guidos from Patterson, they caught you up at Garrett Mountain, they had you barricaded in your old man's car, and I whipped that rock and hit that guy in the eye?
Don't reminisce on me.
Now, to be fair, unlike the Corinthians, who just didn't think to say so, Scatino really doesn't have anything to offer Tony in terms of potential future benefits to gain his favor now. That being said, it's hard not to notice how every time he brings up some sort of personal connection with Tony in order to try and calm things down, it has the opposite effect.
So you never told me how your kid made out at Bowdoin.
How my what?
How your daughter made out at Bowdoin. I wouldn't do anything to insult you. Our kids go to the same school together. Tony, I'm sorry!
So maybe that wasn't the best tactic. This brings us to the reversal of the law, which is really just people whose interest in the general or in the moment isn't greed, which can be seen when Tony takes Meadow and Finn out to eat. Some people are more interested in the opportunity to look superior to others, socially, morally, or something along those lines, and are willing to set other interests aside to do so. Despite the fact that Tony is an intensely greedy person, in that moment, money obviously was not his main concern. If it was, he would have been happy that Finn picked up the check, but he wasn't. He was mad. And he was mad because in that situation, his image as the head of the house and provider was more important than money. According to Greene, the only time to appeal to someone's kindness or generosity is when that person wants to appear generous or kind, in which case you must be sure to do it publicly so that they can get as much attention for their acts as possible, or it defeats the purpose.
I mean, if they don't notice it, what's the point?
Of course, there are definitely people who are genuinely kind and generous, but those kinds of people don't usually join the mafia. Well, thanks for watching this episode here on Bully Whispers. As always, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you at the next score.